Welcome back. Let's talk fitness over 50 or around the 50s. I'm qualified. How about you guys?
Almost. Not quite. I'm younger than you still.
Yeah.
Barely. You're coming up on it, right?
Yeah, I am.
Anybody watching this thing on YouTube, you can see by the look on my face and the hair growing off my face, it's pretty white. I am definitely 50. I'm north of 50 since earlier this year. And so I've been through a few things, seen a few things, got a State Farm commercial guy, know a few things because I've seen a few things, however they say that. And we've talked extensively about fitness at a lot of different levels, different age groups, how age plays in, and not just like training age or experience level, but obviously your biological age and all the things that come along with it. You start to accumulate things over time. Acutely aware of accumulations and acute things that have come along. And so as of recently, we had talked and have talked quite a bit about fitness over 40. And that was more of like a personal thing for me, to be honest, just because we'll talk about Red Dot Fitness a little bit and like what our clientele looks like for the most part. But I have a lot of friends that are a little bit younger than I am. And when I say younger, like 10, about 10 years older or younger than I am. And they're professionals, and they're kind of starting different careers. Like they had a career, they were very active, very fit, and doing whatever they were doing before. And they're reaching this stage where I'm getting those questions from them because, they know I talk about it. They don't necessarily listen to the show, but they know what I do and what I talk about, obviously. And most of our conversations are generally just two dudes talking. But the fitness conversation has been coming up a lot more in this last year as these guys are kind of aging up. It's women too, but it's primarily or dominantly men. And the same things, the same themes kind of continue to arrive. And again, we've talked about that at length. We had actually one of our more popular podcasts was how to build muscle over 40. And I was actually kind of stunned at how many questions I got from that. There was a lot of activity in the DMs, and I was getting emails, and there were phone calls that came after that. And I say that to say, look, if you're in your 40s, you're going to be in your 50s soon enough, and things are going to continue to change. You might need to continue to make adjustments. So I thought it would be a good idea to just kind of address the 50s. And part of what qualifies me to do that is a large part of our clientele here, and we've been in business for 15 years, a large part of our clientele at Red Dot Fitness is in that age bracket. I would say the average age here is going to be like 32 plus, and probably goes up into like the mid 60s. However, we do have people that are way north of 60. My mother trains here, right? And she's north of 75 at this point.
Yep.
Has a workout partner that works out with her that's there. So the point of that being is, again, seeing a few things. And while these people were never like athletes at, in their own right at any given point, they are doing their very best to stay healthy and strong. And I think that's the major thing for most people as they reach that age. They're either trying to just kind of maintain a level of fitness that they may have established in their 40s, and they're recognizing that's getting tougher to do, or they are really trying to slow down the aging process with all the things that sneak up, because it seems to exponentially starts to kind of accelerate right at a certain place. So kind of a couple different populations that we work with, right? I'm very active outside of the gym, working with other populations, and they are kind of in that late 30s, mid 30s to early 40s range. And I see these things coming. So part of this conversation is just like, hey, some things to think about. But, if you're not 50 yet, right, here's some things to think about. Things that I was not thinking about when I was in my 30s, right? I was just worried about 40.
Yeah, you're inevitable. Or what's it called when you like have prolonged life and you don't think about that stuff?
I can't think of it.
That's not inevitable.
I know. That's why I was like, wait, that's not the right word. Yeah. Oh, wait, maybe it's my brain.
Yeah. So
it's inevitable that you can't remember this.
I know, right? It must be that perimenopause.
Which is a thing, right? Going back to qualifying. So anyhow, just with that, just some considerations to think about here. First off, as you're getting older, you're probably noticing some things, even if you're in your 40s, 30s, or 40s for that matter, and that things are working or operating a little differently than they did, 10 years previously, right? Whatever it is. But again, as those years tend to trickle by, some things come up. One is if you're not consistently strength training, right, muscle mass tends to erode, right, for lack of a better term. And that's generally due to less activity and certainly less stress on the system with regard to the activity that you're doing. And so muscle mass tends to drop. Why? because of that, because less activity. The other thing that happens is our diets tend to change a little bit. The other thing that happens is our hormonal balance starts to change a little bit. I mean, you mentioned that word, menopause. There's kind of that, the colloquial term for when that happens with men is called menopause, right? As things start to kind of slow down a little bit. We're producing less testosterone. Same with women. They go through the same thing. It starts to become a hormonal imbalance when we start to look at things. When I say imbalance, it's a natural thing that process that happens, but it creates these things. So those are considerations. While all that's happening, there's other considerations to think about, like your tissue starts to change a little bit. It's not as resilient, right? It doesn't slide and glide the same way it does, right? Or it did at one point and that's likely due to a lack of activity, right? You're just not moving those things. So it starts to get comfortable. Those rubber bands, if you will, get tight. Well, when the rubber bands get tight, then the joints aren't moving the way they should be moving, right? So start to feel a little bit of joint pain. And that can be a real limitation, right? As you get older, ask me how I know, both from acute and cumulative stuff. So
I was just going to say the cumulative effect of just aging, right?
So there's the cumulative effect of the stress you're putting on your body through exercise or your outside activity or whatever you're doing. There's the cumulative effect of all the things we just mentioned that kind of are a natural process. And then there's the acute things or baggage that you're bringing along, and I've got plenty of those. Accidents, falling down, being dumb, all kinds of stuff, right? That kind of stacks. And so when we're looking at, things like joints and muscles, they're not functioning quite the same as they did. If you've done a really good job, they're even probably not working as well as they were 10 years prior.
Well, and that's like a really vicious cycle to fall into at any age, but especially in this age range where you start to notice those things more of if you get into this point of inactivity for long enough where you're feeling stiff and achy because you're inactive so that you can't really be active, but it's making you more stiff and achy because you're not active enough. And then when you do try to be active, maybe it's not the right thing for you, right amount, and then it makes you more stiff and achy. Mm-hmm. So it's really like hard to find and build this kind of momentum, especially if you're like restarting this journey at this age, or you've had like a really high training status and you're trying to kind of maintain things. This balance of like recovery and movement, tissue quality, and all these things. This cycle, it's a hard thing to get yourself out of if you don't have a good game plan. So.
Yeah, and then having the patience with it as well.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure, that's the biggest.
Because everybody wants to go from 0 to 100, and you can't necessarily go 0 to 100 as you start to get older.
Especially if that begins to have a psychological and emotional effect too.
Sure.
I mean, being in pain at any level or just being in any level of discomfort that limits you from doing the things you need or want to do can really take its toll. And especially on the people that were highly driven before and know what a really like great level of fitness feels like for them. And so they know how far away they are from it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets a little exaggerated, but gets in the dome. It's like, why can't I do this? I should be able to do this. I promised myself I wouldn't be this old man, kind of thing. And, and it shows up in places in life that you don't want it to. I was talking to one of my clients the other day had a 2-week vacation, got a bunch of family, lives on the East Coast, and they were out there and got to spend time. And he does a really good job of taking care of himself. And he was out there. He's like, I was on the beach with the kids. He's got grandkids running around, chasing them, playing in the sand or whatever. He goes, I woke up the next day, my feet were really sore, right? And I had muscle soreness in areas, but it felt like I'd kind of worked out a little bit, not joint pain, not like debilitating pain. It was that because he also understands what that feels like. Yeah. So, but it showed up for him there in a good way. Right. And I think that's the thing that people lose track of too, is they're maybe expecting like a physical result that they may be used to, but they're not paying attention to where their fitness shows up for them later in life, and again, going back to like the clients that we have here, we have several clients who are, married, right? Like couples that are married and they, one's more active than the other. Mm-hmm. And that other is starting to recognize like, I'm having a tough time keeping up on the things that we used to do. Mm-hmm. And that's scaring me. Like, I don't want that. Like, and then things start to creep in. They're like, shit, I'm getting old and shit, I'm, how many years do I have left? So people are doing math and things like that. So it can be, I say all that to say on the psychological and emotional thing and how that drives decision-making about your exercise. Yeah.
And we talked about like the psychological component of like, being in pain or feeling inadequate. And, I think that people use that term a lot of like, oh, I'm getting old. when really, yes, you need to be more intentional as you're older, but a lot of those things, the things you're feeling are from a lot of that inactivity. But that can really like bleed into, you just talked about it, like in a relationship, like how you are as a parent, how you are as a grandparent. Like one, if you're in chronic pain, like people who are dealing with that, they're a lot of times very irritable. They're very short. They're not showing up for their family, let alone being able to like a quality of being able to do active things. Like that's a whole other level of being able to participate in your life with your kids, with your spouse, that a lot of people take for granted. And so I think that's when the goals start to shift a lot as you get into your 50s of really trying to maintain quality of life with your family, with your loved ones, still being able to do the things you love, to whatever degree that is, whether it's, hey, I still want to be able to get on the slopes. I still want to be able to go play on the beach with my grandkids. Like the values that people, put their time into, like that's really where it shifts. And that's where your training may need to shift because that's your value point now. It's not where even in your 40s, people are still trying to chase like performative goals or like they really still want that 6-pack on the beach. That would be a cool thing, right? When you go into your 50s, it's more like, I want good quality of life. I want to not be in pain so I can show up for my family, those people around me. And like, that's the direction that things really need to shift. And that's going to look different in how you're training. It really is. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that. I just recalled just yesterday, last evening, I had a consult with a member. She's young. She's in her 30s. And she approached me about some things. I'm like, hey, why don't we connect for about half hour and let's talk through some of this stuff. And she'd kind of thrown some stuff at me at the conclusion of one of our group sessions. And I was like, you're kind of asking me a few different questions. So we have to attack from a few different angles. So let's spend some time doing it. And one part of that was, me asking her, why is this important for you? She'd asked me about a particular movement she wanted to be able to do. And she asked me some stuff about mobility and flexibility. And so I said, why are you asking? What's this? She said, well, my mom is about to turn 78 and she has had low back issues for a long time. And it's really impacting her. It's impacting her attitude. It's impacting her wanting to be involved and hang out. And it's hang out and do things with the family because they stay very active and they do stuff. And I don't want that for me. I don't want that for me. And she's taking stock now as a 30-something, kind of thinking about this. And by the way, she's very fit and she's doing the work. She's doing a good job. But she's recognizing, to your point, she's putting value on different things. It wasn't, I want to lose 10 pounds from the Mexican vacation, next month or whatever, which often is where the younger or less mature, kind of goal setting kind of comes in. And I get it. I did that, like totally did that. But keeping those things in mind as you're moving through your journey. Anyhow, the bottom line there is like, what can you be doing now if you're not 50, if you're listening to this, to kind of avoid some of the things that other people are going through that you can avoid, right? Because we already mentioned some stuff that's just going to happen.
Well, and what she's doing now with forecasting already, like it's way easier to manage throughout the lifespan, those things, versus being in that point where you're like, oh fuck, like I'm not in a place where I want to be physically. Like you can still make progress and you can crawl out of that hole, but it's a way deeper hole versus if you never let yourself get underground from a younger age, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just talking to a client the other day and she went and she had a bone density scan done. She's in her mid 60s and she came in and she was feeling a little defeated. And she's like, yeah, I just got my scan back and I have osteopenia in my hips and I have some osteoporosis in my spine. And I said, okay, but that just means we have work to do. And she's a newer client to us. And, she's under eating. She comes from the generation of wanting to be skinny and being skinny over versus being strong. And so we're just having to work on changing that mind shift. I said, it's not impossible to reverse the osteopenic change. I said, we can do it, but it's going to take work on your part and it's going to take consistency and dedication to the process.
Which I know you've told me about a client that you had in the past. You almost like ran an independent analysis study on her because you had these scans when you had started with her. I forget what her age range was, but I
think she was probably in her early 60s at the time as well.
You're talking about Barbara?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and she
only 60? I thought she was in her 70s at that point. She was with us for quite some time.
But
maybe
even
she was later 60s.
I mean, the not only had she maintained her current level of bone density, but she had improved her bone density. Even
she reversed her osteopenia.
She had started later in life too, right? She had started at that age. So I think that's something I remember. Like people really push. 50 again. 50 is not 80, and even at 80 you can make progress. But I think people get in that hole where they think they can't change things and make progress, even if they are in that deep hole we are talking about. but like that's proof in the pudding of like you can make a change regardless where you're at currently.
Yeah, so that's a great lead into the kind of one of these key points, and one is the setting expectations piece, right? First off is there's some considerations, right, to make here. And so from those, if you start kind of with the considerations that exist both within and outside your control, then let's set some key expectations. And one is that yes, you can reverse some things, right? You can reverse cardiovascular disease. You can work on that pre-diabetes or diabetes. If you wind up with it, you can work on the bone density, the muscle density. Here's a really cool thing. This is science. Like, it doesn't matter how old you are. Like, if you're resistance training, and we'll get to that because that's obviously a key point of our talk today, but you can build and grow. You can grow muscle density. You can grow muscle mass and get stronger. It across the board
at any age. Yep.
At any age. So obviously, setting expectations about what's important for you. What are you really trying to do? That's an interesting point. Sorry, CeCe, that you made about the generation of being skinny, right? And being very thin would be the other way to look at this. And you're starting to see it shift. Like, I understand now that being strong and having some amount of muscle density on my frame is important as it relates to things like osteopenia, osteoporosis, bone density, hence the weight vest, craze that's kind of going on and things like that in that middle-aged female world of fitness influencers right now, which we've talked about. But I guess the understanding that you can make a change, but with that change, like, what exactly do I have to do in order to get there? And it's going to mean thinking about things a little bit differently. So again, setting the expectations is, yes, I can make a change. And what kind of change do I want to make? And then what's the timeline for this?
Yeah, a roadmap.
Yeah, the roadmap. And that's obviously dependent on the individual and what their individual goals, needs, and limitations are. And we've talked about some of those, again, controllables and uncontrollables, but yeah, jumping into it, you can make some serious change. And the setting the expectation is setting a realistic one. Like, if you're just jumping back into this or jumping into it for the first time in your life, and we see a lot of that where people have really never experienced like a consistent exercise program. Maybe they've been a little bit active or whatever, or they're trying to be now. And so they've been doing that for a little while, and they're recognizing, like, God, those aches and pains, right? I'm tired, like I'm fatigued, those kind of things. Those things pop up. But setting an expectation, and expectation is, look, you can get a lot done in a couple of days a week, right? Like, and that's like, if you can make it to the gym 2 times a day, right? Or 2 times a week, and you are active outside, you can make tremendous change. And we see that all the time. That is the majority of our clients. That's what they're committed to here at the gym. That will come in 2 days a week, right? So making that commitment to at least get a couple of days a week of inside the gym training, and we'll talk about some specifics there in a minute, but that's really important. And then finding something outside the gym to go express the fitness that you're gaining, right? Yeah. And it's not, you don't go to the gym just to go to the gym and avoid, again, osteoporosis and whatever, but it should be adding to your life, quality of life and your vibrancy. So how are you going to go out and do that? So I'm not suggesting it by any stretch that just going to two days a week to the gym is going to do it for you, because there's a lot of components. And let's be honest, most of that time spent, if the frequency is 2 days a week, is about an hour. Somebody's in here, but maybe about an hour. Maybe it's a little less. Maybe it's a little bit more. It's not a lot of time. It leaves a lot of other time during the week for you to go do things. That could be walking, could be hiking, could be running, could be riding your bike. There's so many things, right? It could be yoga, Pilates. It doesn't matter to me, as long as you are out there being active and there's intention and purpose for what you're doing. And more importantly, that you enjoy doing it. So when you're setting the expectation for yourself, it's how am I going to reasonably fit this into my lifestyle? Now, here's the other part. As people get older, they generally have a bit more time, right, in their life to do this. Maybe you're in your 50s and you're still working hard, you're still career oriented, kids are a little older maybe at this point if you've got those, right? But you're starting to find like gaps in your schedule, right? How are you spending that time? And where could you be fitting in fitness into your life is an expectation that I would have of you, as a coach. Like, hey, what else are we doing? Because I can help you here, but there's those 23 other hours in those 2 days that we meet, and then there's 24 hours in all the other days. Where can we start to put this stuff in? So, again, setting a realistic expectation about what you can commit to, what you want to commit to, right, and what you can reasonably achieve. And so going back to all the things from the considerations part at the very beginning of this, like, you should not expect this to happen overnight. Yeah. However, I will say this, if you've never done this before, you could see some pretty crazy gains in a very short period of time, because to your body, it's very novel, right? It's very new. And going back to the muscle building piece, which would be key step number 2, which is root your gym training time, right? In those 2 days a week to resistance training.
Yeah. And, we were talking about being active outside of it, and like, it's way easier to get cardiovascular activity in all those things, and especially if you're at a point where you really have been inactive, like going on your walks is some vascular activity or a stimulus. So spend your time in the gym, like doing the things that are really meant, and you can really only achieve that benefit in the gym. So
that's an anabolic.
That's an anabolic thing, right? So if you're coming to the gym and you're only doing 2 hours in the gym and you're coming and walking on the treadmill, you could be getting more use out of your time if you're resistance training. Like cardio is important, but especially for a lot of these things we're talking about, like functional capacity, bone density, like joint pain, your ability to move throughout the day, like strength training is going to have a larger impact on that. And so that's where you really want to root it in that. And, it needs to be appropriate for you at that time. You don't want to run in and start doing things you're not prepared for. And strength training might look, let's say, a little more isolated or a little bit more regressed for you, depending where you're at. But even if you are progressed, like you still need to put your main focus on that. So,
yeah, I agree. So how do you kind of structure that? So especially when I'm talking about the 50 plus crowd here, they may have had an experience in a gym earlier in life where, you pay your membership, walk in, there's all this equipment on the floor, a lot of machines, cardio machines, there's dumbbells, barbells, whatever else. And again, like at that point, maybe you have a higher level of fitness, you have a higher threshold, higher cardiovascular capacity, you can kind of get around, you can do a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of mapped out, like over here are the chest machines, over here are the back machines, over here are the leg machines, all that kind of thing. And I think what people kind of lose track of is if I go in and I do the machines, right? And I love machines, but they go in and they do the machines where they're sitting down doing a chest press, sitting down doing a seated row or a row, sitting down doing a vertical pull, a seated overhead press. Those are all very valuable things. But again, what you're doing is you're not moving very much. And I would encourage people in those 2 days a week that they do things, or they go someplace where they can get a lot of movement done. And they're not, you use the word isolated, but I think in that context, what you're talking about is like, it might look a little bit regressed is what you said. And we may have to focus on some areas to make you a better mover, right? But at the same time, the key should be movement, like big compound movements where we're strengthening total body. So when you go into the gym 2 days a week, we're doing a full body session, right? Sure. We're not going back to, well, on Mondays I do the chest machines, on Tuesdays I do the back machines, and again, for somebody that's 50 or older, that's kind of how they probably got introduced to exercise, especially if they joined like the 24-hour fitness or whatever, because that's the script that they were given when they signed up.
So I have a story to tell you on that, because this new client that we just got, who is 65, she's coming to us from Berkeley, and she's making a concerted effort to come down twice a week.
So that's an hour drive.
Yeah, at least one way, depending on traffic and whatnot. And she had a coach up there, and it was in a box gym, and she was being put on isolated machines. There's nothing wrong with being put on isolated machines. However, I think a bigger bang for her buck would have been bigger compound movements where you're creating co-contraction to brace and stabilize to do the exercise. And so I was talking to her about this, or actually, she was telling me about her experience, and she said, yeah, she'd put me on, like a leg press, or she would put me on a chest press machine, but then she'd have me on the ground doing bicycle exercise, where you go, put your hands behind your head, you're laying on your back, and your elbow goes to your opposite knee for my ab work, because, I really want to tone up there and I want to lose weight. So, it's an educational process with her going through this. And one of her first sessions, I was like, okay, so we're going to work on the deadlift. And what we're going to do is, we had a big Dynamax ball on the ground. And I had her straddle it, and I had her get down into the position, create co-contraction, firing her lats, working on bracing, working on breathing, and then just standing up with the ball. Mm-hmm. And at the exact same time, the other night, you in the barbell class, you were having people do barbell deadlifts from the floor, right? Yeah. And so I said, and that's going to be you eventually. I said, but right now, this is how we're starting. So you can learn the lift, learn the foundation, learn the co-contraction, learn the breathing patterns, so that then we can increase the load and you can lift heavier.
Well,
for the reasons of bone density and creating more muscle mass.
and for sure. And I think that you pointed out something that I really think a lot of people don't think about. It's really popular for training right now. Like there's a kind of a craze with machines, and machines, again, we love machines. They have their place. But we talked about for like this crowd and like the general population right now, one of the biggest issues we have is not moving enough in general, right? And a lot of that joint stiffness and feeling like you can't get into positions, like, yeah, you're not going to feel like you can get onto the floor that one time randomly at the beach if you don't ever get on the floor or you don't ever challenge these positions. So even though you're doing these, these complex movements as far as like the strength exercise, like teaching the hinge, the deadlift, doing things even like in your recovery patterns, like I see you guys doing a lot with some of your newer clients who are newer clients to training of where maybe they're doing that heavy strength movement, but then they're doing something that's maybe lighter, that's more stimulating their movement, stimulating their nervous system. That has a lot of benefits for just general joint quality, but also again, stimulating your nervous system is something that really starts to decline as you, even as you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s. And that has a big impact on like general function, on even if you really are forecasting like falls, things like that. So that general like movement and full body recruitment that you're not really going to get from machines. You may get some of the bone density, you may get some of the strengths, you may get some of those isolated
leaving a lot on the table though,
but there's a lot of things you can be missing on. So I think like using your time well in the gym where yes, you are focusing on strength, you are focusing on doing the big patterns of the typical, like the squat, hinge, things like that, push, pull. But you're also, mixing in isolated movements that you might need some more tissue quality at a specific thing, like your hamstrings need some work to be able to do these exercises safely, but then also mixing in some things that challenge your ability to move and that are global, and that maybe it's not the highest like stress stimulus to develop just pure strength.
But you're moving,
right? You're just moving throughout the gym. And I think that's a lot of things you don't get when you just go to the gym and you do the leg press, the hamstring curl, the seated abduction.
Yeah, so we're talking about kinesthetic awareness, where your body is in space.
For sure.
Yeah, I want people to be independent, and I want them to be confident of that stuff when they're out, if they decide to pick it up a third day a week and they want to do it on their own, or they have a membership somewhere else. I want them to understand how to make the most of their time. And yeah, so you guys kind of laying all that out. I hope that paints a picture for people that it's not just about going in, pushing, pulling, pushing on a leg press, pulling on a seated row machine or whatever. Those are very good things to do. But how can we get this person like up? Let's get them out of the seat. Let's get them out of the chair, right? And get them to use their entire body for that row, use their entire body for that push, from a standing position or a half kneeling position or, a power position or things like that. Things that they need to be good at in life that will pay dividends over time. So I think the other thing that gets missed, when people are like, oh, especially for the new person that's like, oh, now I'm lifting weights and, they feel themselves getting stronger and they can see it, like they can, metrically you can measure it, kind of thing. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm getting stronger. So this is a good thing. But what they're tend to stray away from is the mobility piece. And that's why I go back to movement, right? And getting them to move through these fuller ranges of motion. And again, understanding that there could be limitations there, right? And it might not look pretty at the beginning, and that's okay. Like I would love for you to get into that, full hinge position, but we're not there yet. So, you're looking across the gym and you're seeing a trainer working with a client or whatever, and they're what appears to be them coaching them through a Romanian deadlift. Maybe it's a limited range of motion, right? It's a squat, but they're not getting all the way, ass to grass or parallel to the floor. And that's okay for now. We're working through these things. We're giving a person confidence and we're challenging the entire body. And it's, again, there's a stress that comes with that. Like you have to be aware, if you're in free space, right? Getting into a squat, like what's happening with my, I have to balance, like sitting down or laying down on the leg press, right? Or the hip sled doesn't challenge that at all. Right? It doesn't challenge that at all. Yes, you get the resistance piece, the resistance profile, right? Which then stimulates the muscle, which then can drive an anabolic response, which you're leaving a lot off the table. So getting people moving through space. And it doesn't have to be heavy weights to do that. Their body weight with maybe a prop or maybe something else to get them to focus on things is a place that I really like to start with people that are kind of coming back into it or have never done it before. Like, and get them out of this feels weird feeling. And then get them to trust the process of what's happening there, and then get them to see the result of that when they start to move into more of like a traditional barbell deadlift or kettlebell deadlift or whatever. But in order to get there, we have to focus on that mobility. And a lot of times that mobility becomes vastly decreased because we don't have the strength to get through those movement patterns, right? So while we're building strength, we're also working on mobility. And that could be some stuff where you're not actually under any load at all, including your body weight. You're on the floor, you're doing some stuff, but working through that full range of motion on whatever it is that you're doing, and not putting yourself in an exercise, falling in love with an exercise or a group of exercises that doesn't allow you to do that. It's going to probably, again, you're going to get some benefit, but how do I get the max benefit out of it?
Well, and that really speaks to not just the, we're kind of talking about like the novice or the person like picking things back up or for the first time, but even for the person who has been maintaining like, and they've been super active, like maybe there hasn't even been a break, but one of the mindset shifts, instead of always just using maximum loads, like it might be using more full range of motion that's within your capacity, or mixing it. Maybe, like we talked about, like maybe you need to warm up a little bit longer in your mobility work to get into positions that you still want to challenge that range of motion, but maybe it takes a little bit for the body to, to grease up a little bit so you can get into that range of motion. And something that too, that like, again, we were talking about that I think a lot of people don't think about when we're talking about time efficiency of you can do your heavy strength movements, but then maybe while you're like do your heavy squats and then in your rest times, you're doing some sort of upper body mobility drill, right? That can improve those things while you're like resting
it's movement.
And your movement and you're improving those qualities. And this can be for the highest level of performers.
Absolutely.
That they can benefit from those things and help with that general movement and decreasing that achy feeling and not being limitations that they're dealing with. So for sure.
Yeah, no, I love what you said there about just taking the extra time to warm up. Yep. All right. Like, and that is, again, specific clients out there, we got a creaky knee, right? We've had a meniscus and an ACL, same knee. Takes a little longer to lube that thing up, to get it going, to make it feel, and this may sound corny to people, but trust me, when you get older, you'll appreciate this, and like to make you and that joint, so to speak, without giving it like a persona or feelings, feel safe.
Yeah.
Like we're about to move into this thing. Let's get it really ready for this movement. And when you're young, you don't give a shit about that. Like you go in there, you twirl it, you grab the 10-pound plate and you do the arm circles with it or whatever else. And you're like, okay, we're hitting the bench press today.
I mean, when you're older, you may need to lube things up a little bit.
Definitely got to lube is an important thing, right? I digress. But the point of that being is it may take a little longer, and you may need to do some more focused work there, so that the work that you do beyond that after that workout is done at the highest level that you could possibly do it. And again, that, to your word, patience, right? And more than that, understanding how it's helping you. Because I think, like, you look at programs and it's like, oh, we do this warm up, but people don't actually understand what they should be focused on. There's not a lot of intention in that warm up. Like, why? What specifically are we doing here, and why are we doing it? And that becomes that much more important as all these things start to set in over time.
And we were just talking about this with the program we're releasing soon that you were talking about with this of
the Fit for Action
program. Fit for Action program. Yeah, sorry. We had included some mobility drills and warm-ups, but you had said the comment that I really, really love, that warm-ups are very, very personal, right? Of learning to, as you go throughout this process, even if you are working with a coach, whether it's working hand in hand with the coach or you just as the individual. And sometimes, like, I have a client that it comes to me and they've been training for a decently long time and I've been helping them. Sometimes I really don't impact a lot of their warm-ups because I know that psychologically, like whatever they're doing, that's, sometimes there might be like, hey, maybe we can get more out of it. There need some specifics, or we get more out of this, or this could be, maybe this isn't the best use of your time. But there's certain things that if that helps you feel ready to go for the workout, and I think warm-ups are very individual on you as a person in general, but I've talked about this a lot, of they're individual on like how you're feeling that day. Maybe you have been more active this week. You've been moving more. Maybe that warm-up, it doesn't need to be 15 minutes because you've been better about general active and movement activity. But hey, maybe you've been grinding on the desk and you've been like sitting there for a long time this week. And now you need to take a little bit longer to get into that, and really bringing some awareness to like, hey, that knee that usually bothers me, like I think I need to do some more isolated warm-ups before I get into those heavy squats, or I need to change the program a little bit, or that shoulder or whatever. And that's where the warm-ups are very important. The mobility is very important, but it can start to be very individual, and it can be impacting your just general movement throughout the week. So that's a huge thing. So
yeah, for sure. And again, you went back to like, what other activities are you doing to kind of express that mobility or challenge it in other ways? Which brings me to the next point here, and that is the cardio piece of this. So again, going back to age ranges, right, and what they may be used to or what they may have been introduced to, and it's kind of inside their belief system. There's a lot of weird stuff as it relates to cardiovascular exercise. And there's still a lot of people, and we talk to them quite frequently, where that is their main focus. That is what they've used to, quote unquote, get fit in the past, which really means it's what I used to lose weight, right? It's what I used to offset the caloric balance equation. And that worked for them, at that time. And now they're recognizing it's not working for them anymore. Again, go back to those considerations. Well, you may have a little less muscle mass on you, right? Hormones have changed a little bit. Like, it's not going to impact you the same way. We haven't even gotten into nutrition, and I don't want to dig deep into that. We beat that up on the show all the time, but those needs change, right? And if you've started to eat less, so you're eating less calories, and the macro balances have been offset, and we haven't maintained certain things, like that cardiovascular component can start to work against you, over time. Yes, strong heart, strong lungs, strong vascular system, extremely important, and that's why I promote it so much, particularly as you get older in your workouts, and it needs to be included. And it's not just walking. It's not just hiking. You need to stress that system, right? And what does that mean? Just like your muscles, right? It's the same. It's the same thing. But there are some appropriate and inappropriate ways to do that. And there's also, I think you have a limited return on investment over time, right? So you need to, when I say you need to stress it, you need to occasionally really push that. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean pushing it for an hour, right? It means pushing it for a few minutes, right? And when I'm saying that, a few minutes, so like cumulatively mm-hmm. in your 1 hour session. So it doesn't all have to be done at one time. It can be interspersed, right? And don't be afraid of that, right? It could be like 8 to 10 minutes, kind of at the end, where we are pushing limits here. Same way we'd be pushing limits on your chest press, your dumbbell chest press or something like that. We need to get close to or near failure in order to elicit a certain response. The difference between the cardio, response and the resistance training response is the cardiovascular response when you're stressing that system is more catabolic, right? It doesn't send a muscle building signal, and the stress hormones don't impact the system the same way, right? Versus the resistance training, which is more of an anabolic or muscle signaling, signal that says, hey, build here, we need to be stronger. This does the opposite of that. It's about reserving calories. It's about reserving fuels. It's about shuttling things to where they need to be to get through that, but it's not stimulating that response. So sometimes we have to break people out of that belief system. That can be really tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to say, so I've had this conversation 4 times, and this is a Thursday. I've had it at least 4 times this week, and it's with women who are in their 50s mm-hmm. and older, because they're still of the same mindset. As hard, as it is to have these conversations with them and to get them to try to think differently. They are so emotionally married to, got to do my cardio. I got to get on my bike. I got to ride my bike for 30 to 50 minutes before I do my strength training. And
it has nothing to do with fitness or health.
No.
It's all about losing weight, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, going back to the muscle building versus the breaking down response, the anabolic versus catabolic, like this is the tough one, because you're talking to them, and it is deeply ingrained. It's like religion, right? It's like you're trying to change their mind about something that they have a deep belief in, because maybe it worked for them before. That's just what's been pounded into them when they're at a young age, and it's kind of hard coded now. So again, I say that to say about cardio, not to villainize it, which is the opposite end of that spectrum, where don't do cardio, it's going to wreck your gains, that kind of thing. Or if you just lift weights hard enough, it's enough. It isn't, man. No. It isn't. Like, for some goals, maybe it is, right? Depending on what your event is or whatever it is that you're doing. What's the ratio of cardiovascular fitness to strength and power that you need. But here's the deal. Excuse me. When you get in here, particularly if you're coming back into this or starting it after a break or starting it for the first time, the more you build that capacity, that cardiovascular capacity, the faster you're going to recover from the work that you did. So, and the more gains, quote unquote, you could get from the work that you do put in. And you are getting a health benefit by, again, stressing the system. It needs to be appropriate, right? And there are ways to do that, but it doesn't need to be 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. And that's usually the thing. Like, I got to do my 30 minutes of cardio. So they go through a strenuous workout, and they're like, I'm going to go get on the stair stepper or the stair mill for 30 minutes. Why? Because I want to lose weight.
Or I've only burned this many calories on my watch.
Right? Yeah. So again, that's where I would look at that as like that's activity you could be doing outside the gym. The amount of calories that you burn in a half an hour on that step mill are probably not going to be that much different than the calories that you would burn going through like a brisk walk for the same amount of time. You would be surprised like at that difference there.
Yeah, we were, to go back to the way beginning, we were talking about like a lot of like the psychological components of fitness and the emotional components of fitness, and like going outside, that is something that a lot of people don't do enough too. So when you can do, especially if it's just, movement or low level cardio, that doesn't need to be a very controlled, like what are your watts on the assault bike or whatever, getting outside and getting sunlight and seeing nature and getting fresh air, like that has a lot of other impacts, which can help with your accountability or your consistency in your whole program. Right. And to go back, like, I think the biggest thing that if I could really just get in a lot of people's heads with exercise in general is the goal of exercise is what is the adaptation I'm getting to this stimulus.
Right.
Like that should always be your mindset of what is the adaptation. The adaptation isn't I'm burning calories. That's not the adaptation. Like what am I stimulating in my cardiovascular system that has benefit? What am I stimulating in my, these components that can help with my recovery? Or when you're doing a lot of conditioning cardio, like you start to feel more vibrant, you start to feel more vitality and more energy, things like that. And then how does that tie into what is my adaptation response from my strength training, from my muscle building, from my mobility, from my movement? All these things are in this matrix of what response is this going to give to my body? Not how can I torture my body? How can I burn more calories?
How can I punish myself?
How can I punish myself? So when we sometimes rag on cardio, it's because of the mindset that people go about it of I'm trying to burn calories. We love cardio and there's lots of benefits and it's not going to kill your gains and it's not going to be detrimental as long as you go into with the mindset of what is an adaptive response, and that's going to guide whatever protocols you're using for that cardio programming, for that conditioning program that you're on, and how can that fit into your programming with still in this age range, being rooted in the strength training is that main key. So
so just in wrapping that one up or tying a bow on it, as Stephen would say, is when you go to the gym, right, where they have all this equipment that you can be stimulating the anabolic response with, right, that you don't have at home or don't have access to outside of a gym, right? You should be the majority of your time should be spent trying to elicit that kind of a response. Rather than I have an hour, so I'm going to do a half hour of strength training and a half hour of cardio training. That's stinking thing. That's backwards thinking.
Yep.
Like, what can I get done in my hour? How do I be most efficient at getting these adaptations that I'm looking for? And what could I do outside the gym to enhance this, right? Or in the other activities that I do, what can I do to challenge myself a little bit more, or make or stimulate this adaptation in a little bit of a different way? And I think the point in saying all that is this, like, if you have an hour and you spent 45 to 50 minutes of that through your warm up and your resistance training, where you're really focused on building strength, building muscle, increasing your mobility, right? And you had 10, 15 minutes left over at the end, or it was interspersed throughout that workout, right? Without getting, too wild with the order of operation or whatever, just getting that done at a higher intensity, right? That's uncomfortable, right? That means lungs burning a little bit, right? Breathing heavy, sweating, feeling a little bit uncomfortable. You did that, you get way more out of your 1 hour session than you will if you're thinking about it like, well, I got to do a half hour of this and a half hour of that. That's not the way to think about this. And still people think like that. Like this is what was fed to them for a long time, and they're coming back at it with that kind of a thing. So keeping that consideration, in mind, again, not punishing yourself. The next thing, and we mentioned this before, is the nutrition component. And again, going back to the considerations, eating less, hormonal changes, decreased muscle mass on the frame. This is something that people have a really tough time on at 50 plus, in life, because they have a way of doing things. And it's not like, I just don't eat these things. It's like, I have a routine, right, that I've been doing for the last 20 years. And trying to break somebody out of that routine and getting them to think a little bit differently about it is immensely difficult as a coach. So if it's because it's an immensely difficult challenge for most people, I would say probably 90% of the people listening to this.
And this is one of those cycles too that we talk about, that it's really hard to get someone out of psychologically, but then physically, when you psychologically think, hey, I want to be healthier, I'm trying to lose weight, and you start to eat less, then, we talked about all the negatives of a lot of the things you feel of getting older are the lack of movement, the lack of activity, the lack of muscle mass, all these different things. You eat less, you're going to have less muscle mass. You have less muscle mass and you eat less, you have less energy, you're going to move less, you're going to feel more stiff and achy. And it's just this cascading effect of impact, that when these things all bleed into each other. And then you're not moving more enough, so then you're not hungry, so then you're not hungry, so
you're not
all these
eating,
things, right? So really, your metabolism doesn't magically, you turn 50 and it just drop off the side of a cliff. There is some component of those things with the hormonal changes, but a lot of that really comes from the decrease in muscle mass, the decrease of activity, the decrease of daily movement. And when you keep all those things high, you can continue to eat a large amount of food and fuel your body, and you'll be vibrant and you'll really benefit from that regardless of any age, but especially as you're getting into this component. And, things like, we always talk about like the macro breakdowns, like protein is very, very important. Yeah, one of the changes, and this is generally when you're older, like sometimes how you assimilate protein, you might actually assimilate it not as well. So you might actually need to increase your protein as you get older. That might be a component that you need to think about. You definitely don't want to be slowly decreasing that. That's just causing more of that response that we were talking about, like of atrophy. Your body is atrophying if you're not fueling it, where that fuel and that material from those calories that you're feeding are fighting that atrophy response in all, manifest or in all ways that you can think about. So,
I would agree. So again, having this conversation with however many women this week is, in the 50 plus age range, one talking about what are they consuming, how much are they consuming, and one being working on their protein. But the other thing is too, especially this one client of ours that Stephen and I, we work with, and that is making sure she's getting plenty of carbohydrates to fuel her performance in the gym. Mm-hmm. Because if she's not getting enough carbohydrates in the morning to fuel her system because she's been doing fasted workouts, her body's going to use her lean muscle tissue to fuel her through the workouts. Mm-hmm. Again, and that's going to work against her because then she's going to lose lean muscle tissue. And what have we seen in the most recent InBody? We've seen her losing lean muscle tissue. And then we have a freak out. And so we're having as coaches to work with this individual to talk about, hey, okay, what's happening? Let's look at what you're doing. Yeah, she's sticking to her macros as far as with Stephen, but at the same time, what's the order of operation as far as onboarding it and what else is she doing? So, having to have the conversation of, what, you need to get up and you need to consume something with some carbohydrate in it so that you can fuel yourself through your workouts, and then making sure that you're following up your workout with getting plenty of protein and carbohydrate in afterwards as well. So,
for sure.
Yeah, it's such a tough mindset to change out of people. Again, going back to freak out mode, I'm not losing weight, I'm gaining weight, right? Some things
I'm gaining body fat.
I'm gaining body fat, like eat less. That's the answer.
Eat less, move more. And that's totally the mindset of like, I'm going to force
more
my
cardio,
body.
Eat less calories.
Exactly. And I think that mindset of like, we've talked a lot with her of like, you cannot force your body to do things. You can set yourself up and following these guidelines and these principles and these things that really are, that may feel like the wrong thing in the moment, but they really are the right thing. Where on the other side of forcing, eating less, under eating on macros, doing more and more cardio, hammering that, feeling like shit all the time because of that. It's funny because this individual, and she already knows we're talking about her if she's on listening to this, but this individual, like she went on a vacation where we told her like, you need a mental break, you need to relax, you need to go eat some good food, just lay on the beach, chill. And she came back actually stronger. She came back stronger after taking 10 days off because she was fucking eating on vacation. It's
and
amazing resting. It's amazing what that does. We haven't done it in body yet. We haven't done it.
I wonder you guys, it would have been cool to stick around because I bet she lost a little bit of weight too.
Yeah. But let's look at this individual. She is in her mid 50s, and this is what we're talking about. We're talking about being 50 years old, in this age range, and what's happening to you, and what do you need to do to reevaluate or restructure your exercise and nutrition.
Yeah, I think so. This is something that I think probably people could relate to, and just kind of wrapping all that up. And that is, when you're in your 20s, you could probably follow like the 70-30 rule. As long as for 70% of the time I was kind of on track, 30% of the time I could kind of be off with my exercise, have drinks on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, and maybe even Sunday afternoon or whatever.
College for sure.
Right? Not sleep as much or whatever. And that 70% would kind of outweigh that 30%. I could still get a result. Also, keep this in mind. You're probably new at whatever you were doing. You were getting newbie gains to a certain extent. That neurological and physiological adaptations were happening more efficiently and effectively, right, at that time because this was kind of new to you and you're more resilient and things are more stacked in your favor. As you get older, again, we've already talked about those things, then it becomes more like the 80-20 rule. Right now, it's like 80% of the time I need to be doing this. And oftentimes you have to do the 70-30 too long to recognize like, oh, I got to clean this up. I need to change some things. And then it moves to more to 80-20. Well, as you start to stack years on that and you're still going through those same patterns that we've just discussed, it becomes more of the 90-10 rule. There's not as much forgiveness for being off track in a couple of different ways. One, the fitness piece. And we were talking about this before we got on, like, you're staying consistent and then you're off, right? For whatever. You go on a trip, you go on a vacation, then you take a couple extra days to kind of, because you got back and there was all that laundry stacked up. You had all the emails you had to do and, the yard needed to be mowed and you had to pick the dog up from the kennel and all that stuff. And all of a sudden you've been off, like you went on a 5-day vacation and now you've been off for 10 days, right? And then you come back in here and you feel awful, right? Everything you pick up feels heavier than it's ever felt, right? Your cardiovascular capacity has adjusted and it doesn't feel great.
Well, and I think that's important to talk about this client of, we said what we just said, but this individual, she is probably the over hard worker.
Oh, she's an overachiever for
She's
sure.
overachiever in things. So I don't know if she told you, she was still on vacation, resting and doing way less, but she still worked out 4 times on her vacation. So it wasn't like she was doing nothing, but it was definitely still a big recovery response. So even though we're saying like she needed that break, when we're talking about in this case, like, a majority of my clients here, I would say probably like 30 to 40% are kind of in this age range or above, right? And with them, even if they miss, 4 or 5, if I train them twice a week, which you can see great results, we said that, but if they miss one of those sessions I see it, sometimes it really feels like we took like 10 steps back.
Yeah. So if you're only committed to 2 days a week, understand what taking that one of those days off
50% of your work, right?
Yeah.
So you can get great results from the 2 days a week and the movement and the activity. But what you're talking about needing to manage the 90-10 is the consistency has to be there. You can make progress at any age and in any way. You can make progress and make gains and improvements in all these areas, but it's a slow grind and you need to be patient. And unfortunately, the bummer is, though, if you take that time off, it's a pretty steep fall off pretty quickly for a lot of people.
And it could be those aches and pains come right back. You start to feel, and then it goes to the psychological and emotional components,
and
all the
it's
things.
so hard to get you back rolling when you get back and all that.
So here's the flip side to it, right? Like, so if you are practicing the 90-10 rule, right, as you're getting older and you are doing those 2 days a week in the gym and you're getting some activity out and you're seeing those results, like generally what that does almost every time is people like, now I think I can do a little bit more. And they turn it into 3 days a week, right? And not straight to 4, but to 3, they get that extra day. And because they feel good, they're recovering, right? They're not feeling drained. They're not feeling broken, all the time. And they feel a drive to do it. They have a larger level of commitment to it because they recognize it's showing up for them in many different ways. Yeah. And they want to either increase or accelerate results, or they recognize like, I don't hurt anymore. I hated exercise before because it was painful, right? It sucked. And now I don't hurt, right? And so and I have the time to do it. Like, let me get in there an extra day. And so going back to the 70, 30, 80, 20, 90, 10, you could find yourself moving back into the 80-20 rule, right? Where you can now maybe miss a workout. Now I've missed 1 out of 3 instead of 1 out of 2, right? Okay. That percentage changes dramatically. You go from, 50% to 30%, right? And while that's not awesome, you don't want to do that all the time. The same thing on the nutrition side. Once we start going, it gives you that more flexibility. I can eat more, right? So I can go over or I can be under, and it doesn't impact me as dramatically if I'm closer to maintenance, right, on the calorie side of things, and I am managing my macros a little bit more. It's okay to go splurge and have the social night or whatever, and it doesn't impact you maybe the same way the next day and the days following. You can do maybe a couple nights a week. One night, nothing wrong with this, but pizza night, is always on Thursday nights with the family or whatever. I can have the pizza, right? But if you're practicing that 90-10 rule because you are in the beginning stages of this, or you're having a tough time kind of re-entering into it for that matter, like that stuff impacts you more than it did when you were working on the 70-30 rule as a 20-something or early 30-something.
Which I love what you're saying. Which I love what you're saying with that of like these things that you can, the more things you're doing to manage this, like the more workouts you are doing consistently or the more nutrition things you are managing, the more when you take a slice off, that is a lesser percentage of the total work of the total things you're doing. And you have actually more wiggle room, right? If you are eating more and you're managing your nutrition, all those different things. So I love that it actually provides more wiggle room, the more bought in you are most of the time.
Gives you more flexibility.
For sure.
Right?
100%.
And to go back to that pain comment, you know, people have a lot of aesthetic goals. They have a lot of performance goals. But when we changed, when we talked about this age group, when those goals start to change, the biggest thing that keeps my clients bought in and will keep you bought into an exercise routine if you're executing things well and it's the right program from you and you're managing your recovery and you're managing your movement is when you start to feel better. When you do activity and I feel good from that. I don't feel beat up. I feel way less pain. Those are the things that are going to get you bought in. That has a deep emotional, psychological, you know, tie into your soul that really, really like humans crave to not, who wants to be in pain and suffering all the time. So, you know, it's great to have these goals of like, okay, I want to build more muscle or I want all these things. But when you focus on how does this working out feel, you know, I was just having this conversation with a client who was asking me like, oh, she thinks I just love working out. And I was really like, I don't love the process of working out a lot of times. It's work. It's hard. It sucks. But what keeps me bought in is because even if I don't work out for a few days, the pain, the creaks, even for me at my ripe young age, you know, it still starts to crawl up. And what keeps me bought in is how the exercise and how the movement makes me feel.
Yep. It shows up for people in ways that they're not expecting or don't even realize. So I've said this before, is there's so many people out there that don't know what healthy even feels like. They have zero connection to it.
Sure.
They don't know. They've never actually had a good level of health. Yep. Scratch the fitness part, but they just haven't had which is a huge part, obviously, of health. But they don't even know, they don't understand what healthy feels like. Yep. And when they start to feel that way, again, all these things get switched on and they recognize, man, this is showing up for me in ways that I didn't really realize. Mm-hmm. And it's new to them. The same thing on the other side when they're not in pain anymore, like the pain has become like the normal, right? Another quick story, client out there, again, knee guy, right? Has had some knee issues. And he had kind of like a really busy day. He'd golfed, right? He'd gone and done some extra activity, and he'd had a heavy workout with me on the beginning of that week. And so he had come to me like 3 days later or whatever when we were kind of working out, and he was telling me his knee was bothering. And I was like, oh, well, let's talk through. And I go, well, it makes sense. Like there's a lot more activity. We're kind of newer into this new block of training that we've been doing, and I've been pushing him a bit. And I go, okay. All right, where are we on a scale of 1 to 5? 5 being like you're debilitated, 1 being you feel great. I guess I'm probably like a 4. And I'm like, okay, that's good to know. All right, you're not debilitated, so we're going to keep moving, right? Which is the one thing that I think a lot of people start to cut out. They're like, I'm hurting, I don't want to move. No, we're going to move. We will figure out, we're going to work through this and work around it. Yep. And again, so getting yourself out of that mindset as somebody who does have these aches and pains is, movement can fix this. You heard this said before, movement is medicine, right? Appropriately done, it can be medicine for you and your body. The other thing though was, okay, so we got through that week, right? And it was, still a little bit irritated for him, whatever. So we worked around it. He was a little hesitant, a little nervous. We decreased some loads. We deloaded a little bit on a couple things and increased loads in other areas because it gave us that flexibility to do that, right? And then he came in the following week at the beginning of the next week. So this was the end of the week when we were kind of managing this, comes in the next week. First question out of my mouth is, man, how's the knee today? And he paused. There was a silence there, and I saw his eyes kind of drift up, and I'm like, that's all you need to say, man. He's like,
you're not thinking about it then.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't hurt. It's gone. And he just realized like, that's the first time in a long time with all the activity he'd been doing on his own and all the activity that I had been taking him through specific to intensities and volumes and things like that. He's like, I actually feel good. Like I feel good. That was as surprising as as his fitness showing up, for somebody's fitness showing up for somewhere else where they're out on that hike or they're doing that thing, they're out on the golf course, whatever it is. And like, shit, I just got through 18 holes and I don't feel like I got run over by a train today. Yeah. Kind of thing. And so again, going back to people don't know what healthy feels like. They also don't know what it feels like to not be in pain or be in discomfort. And so you have to check in, right? So as a coach, you need to check in with that stuff, obviously, so you can manage the program, but also to have them have these realizations of where this stuff is actually showing up for them in their life, or more specifically in that case, not showing up. So anyway, again, 50 plussers, Like, trust me, I understand. I feel you. I have my own things going on. We work with a ton of people. You already mentioned it. 30, probably 40% of your clients are in that age bracket. I would say that makes up probably 30, 40% of the clientele that we work with here on a whole. So and we've been doing this for 15 years. Why? Well, we're a little higher ticket item. Right. And I think people with a little bit more discretionary income that are now finally, they're really prioritizing their health and know they need help and have had pain and have had these challenges are coming to us for that. So that makes sense. We're getting referrals. It's what we do. Right. So that makes sense too. In terms of, again, just why it looks like that. But we have plenty of other people that the rest of that percentage is varied and mixed with people that are younger or whatnot. And they're seeing these people do things they can't do, right? The younger populace is looking over and go, oh shit, that's Ray over there. And he's lifting twice as much. What the hell?
Oh, yes.
Kind of thing, right? As an example. So for those that are younger, if you got, aging siblings, aging uncles, aunts, brothers, your parents or whatever, things to think about. If you're looking at them right now and you're going, I don't ever want to be like that. Well, what are you doing to not be like that? So this might not be relevant to you right now as the 30-year-old listening to this. It might not feel relevant, but it is. And the basic foundations and principles still remain. So, re-examine your program. What are you doing? How is this impacting me? To your point, like there should be a purpose for every single thing I'm doing here. It shouldn't be about punishing myself for my transgression at the Sunday football game, right? With the foods that I ate and the drinks that I drank and whatever. And I got to come in on Monday and just absolutely destroy myself. Why are you doing that? Like, okay, I think that's good. Like there's a little bit of shame in maybe what you did and that's motivating you to get going. But like, what are you actually choosing to do today and why are you actually doing it? And it's the same for the 50-year-old. Who may be just jumping back in or 50 plus that's jumping back in or revisiting this or doing it for the very first time. So I think all that said, if you had to really wrap it up, the overview there is there needs to be a plan. It needs to be well executed. And as you get older, there's less flexibility in messing that up. Like you really want to get off to the right start so you can get out of pain, get fit, increase muscle, increase, or maintain your bone density, improve that cardiovascular fitness so that you can enjoy the fruits of the labor as you move into your retirement and whatever else. And we see this constantly where people come in and they've worked their asses off. We have some really high achievers here. Again, going back to the higher ticket item, type of service that we provide. They were executives, right? They were business owners. They were directors. They made a lot of money working really hard probably for whoever they were working for. And we got a lot of early retirements in here. People that are in their 50s that are done. Like, I'm done. Like I did it. Like I achieved all the things. I went to school, got the straight A's, got into the university, got into the MBA program, whatever else. And then when they got done, when they got to retirement, they recognized, I feel like shit. So if this helps you avoid like shit, when you get to, that certain point in your life, then I'm happy, right? So if you take anything away from this talk, try to put it into practice. At the same time, if you need help, it's easy. Just reach out to us. We're happy to, kind of walk you through where you are now and kind of give you some direction or provide some things for you. But yeah, I appreciate this conversation because I don't think it gets had a lot. You hear, people that are already uber fit or doing things that are talking about stuff that makes perfect sense, but that's not you. So again, the 50 plusers or whatever, I think get a coach, right? Is a really good place to start. Get a coach, do some shopping, be discerning, about the decisions you're making, and take stock of where you currently are now, and really check in. Like, what are my issues? Like, what's the reality of my situation in terms of setting expectations? How I'm prioritizing my time, where I want to prioritize my time inside and outside the gym. That movement piece is super important. So don't drop into one of these, cookie cutter workout programs that, your friend Joe or you got results from 10, 15 years ago or whatever. And the last part of that is on the nutrition side. And that is just, again, you're going to have to make some adjustments here. And I know that's really hard to do. Very, very tough to do. It's the hardest thing to do. But if you don't start addressing that now, all the work that you try to put in, if it's only 2 days a week, it's going to be really tough for you to get out of pain, feel better, feel vibrant, go do the things that you want to do for the long term. And that's what we're trying to solve for.